Welcome to the Golden Experience. I have Dr. Ed-Dee Williams on the show again, and like I told you, I said I have him back, and particularly today, I wanted to talk with Dr. Williams about raising boys in general, and then specifically for the African American community, raising boys, the pains with that, the challenges, the struggles, what is discipline and what discipline is not. It seems sometimes. And Dr. Williams, you can shed some light on this with this first question. There's a fine line between discipline and abuse.
Absolutely.
Whether it be physical or verbal, when it comes to boys or hard-headed little boy, as the baby boomer generation would say, the hard-headed little boys don't want to do what you tell them to do, that type of thing. Just starting off with that, where do we draw the line between I'm giving my son discipline, my little rambunctious, energetic little boy discipline, and now I'm being abusive? That's going to lead to patterns and behaviors later on that are going to manifest in him being abusive to other people.
Yeah. Well, I think, the first part with any type of discipline with kids is I think you have to think about what's the intention. What is my goal with this? Kids they're children for a reason. We have different rules and different laws, different policies for kids versus adults for a reason. There's differences in how they think, their behavior. Kids are more impulsive. Research shows that your brain doesn't really finish developing until you're about 25 years old.
Yep.
That's why we see teenagers act out, do more impulsive things, drive crazy, do things that are more that we would, we look back at our own childhood and like, why would I do that?
Yeah.
I knew better, right? So I think, when kids do something that you feel like you need to discipline them for, then the thought should be, what's my intention? Is my intention to teach them a lesson? Is my intention to instill fear? Is my intention to deal with my own anger? And that's what we find a lot is the discipline that people put out towards their children. A lot of times is out of their own anger. I'm angry that you didn't do what I said. I'm angry that you didn't follow the rules. And so I'm responding to you out of anger.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it tends to become abusive, is that I'm not thinking about your long-term development. I'm not thinking about what you become or what this is going to do for you long-term. I'm just dealing with my anger by, hitting you or by yelling at you or calling you out of your name. That's the first part of it. So we really have to learn how to separate our anger from our disciplining of our children.
Mm-hmm.
The other part is, that line it's so hard to really identify. Every group has their own kind of style of punishment. Black folks tend to do more physical punishments. White people people in America at least tend to do more kind of verbal punishments. There's these different, it's different for everybody. But I think we really have to think about, if I am to respond to my kid this way, what could this turn into?
Mm-hmm.
And again, that comes back to that intention, right? So that's the main part. I think it's just really, and I think as parents, we don't, and I'm seeing this more commonly, we're getting better at it, I think, overall, but parents, we don't question ourselves enough, and being a parent is a learning experience, right?
Yeah.
Like I have a 9-year-old and I have a 2-year-old. With my 9-year-old, every time I do something, I'm learning because I've never raised a 9-year-old before.
Yeah.
When he turns 10, I've never raised a 10-year-old before.
Right.
So everything I'm doing is experimental in a sense, right? It's me trying to figure out the best way to handle this. And every kid's different. My son, when he was 2, was the calmest child you could ever met. He would sit down and watch TV next to you, and you think you're a grown man just sitting there watching, whatever's on TV. My daughter will not sit down for anything. She runs circles around my house. She'll pick up something, look at you, and throw it just because she wants to. And I had to learn how to respond to that because it's different than how I'm responding to my son, whose behavior was different.
Yeah.
So it's really interrogating the intention, interrogating yourself as a parent of what you're doing and how you're responding to your child.
Mm-hmm. You look just and acting just like your daddy.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Like, now you punishing him for who you procreated with.
Yeah.
So, and it's fun.
That phrase, man, just bothers me so much, especially when you have a mother say that to their child, because it already instills this fact that you're going to grow up to be a bad person like the father.
Yeah.
You're perpetuating the father as a bad person rather than a human being who maybe he made, depending on the situation, maybe he made mistakes, maybe he's not active. We can't punish a child for that, but we also shouldn't be throwing salt at another individual in front of our child. You can have your opinion, but I have an issue with framing the parent of a child in a negative way in front of them, especially at a younger age. That's something you have a conversation with them with as they grow older. You continue to have that conversation. And you make them understand that people make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are bigger than others, and that your job as a parent is to do the best you can by them. So that you act just like your daddy, or or the opposite. You act just like your mama, like that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you're framing your child in a problematic way, and you're giving them a negative image of another half of them, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So you did your you did your doctorate on this work or something similar?
So my PhD is in mental health and depression primarily, but it really gets into masculinity and
Yeah.
manhood and then family structures come into play in it. And so that a lot of what my work has come into is like boys who are in single parent households, or boys who some of it gets into the role of black men in boys' lives as they grow older, and how that plays into their mental health and how they go about seeking help for things like depression, anxiety, stuff like that.
And so I'm not going to ask you to give us read the whole book out to us. So give us some insight on that. What you found out, what your research uncovered. And just go ahead. I'm gonna let you talk. Just go ahead and talk about that and what you found and what you discovered and what you wrote about, and why was that the specific subject that you chose?
Yeah. So my research is around the work that I've done recently is on Black boys' mental health and their perceptions of depression, the experiences with seeking help and support, and what came from that work was really around how they maneuvered through different stages of what they were experiencing, these depressive symptoms they were experiencing, how they maneuvered through those stages, and in each stage of that experience, how they sought support. And it often came back to family, parents, siblings, these kind of structures around them. I'll give you the gist, the overall finding that I found in the primary study that I'm actually publishing right now. I'm submitting to a journal in the next few weeks. Is that for I specifically say black boys, high school age boys, between about ages 14 and 19 years old, that they had very unique stages that they maneuvered through when they experienced depression. They almost always wanted to address things on their own, the self-reliance part. So my son might pop in the background. I hear him coming in the door, so you may see my parenting in action.
Right.
But they almost always wanted to do things on their own. They felt like making independent decisions about how to address their mental health was important for them as men, as they were becoming men. But when they did seek support outside of just trying to do things on their own, they almost always went to a family member first. And what it was the family provided for the boys who had very good familial ties, really good family structures, had parents they can go to, fathers they can go to, mothers they can go to. It was the family provided a lot of emotional support and guidance. And for boys, there's already stigma around mental health. There's already stigma around depression and help seeking and things like that, like saying I feel sad. There's always stigma around that for boys. And so their family kind of gave them a sense of like, it's okay to talk about this. But that was really important for the boys who said, oh yeah, my parents get along. My parents are together, but I can talk to my dad or my mom. That they almost always, when they can talk to them, they went to them.
Okay.
For the boys who in my study who had those kind of more fragile or damaged familial ties, they didn't have that same comfort with their parents. They couldn't talk to their mom the same way, the dad the same way. They went to friends. Now that could be good or bad depending on circumstances.
Right.
Because your friends will support you and give you love, but they also sometimes give the wrong advice on how to handle things. And that became problematic. It was, let's go smoke this joint. Let's go, and even good things, like, let's go work out, let's go play basketball, we'll get over it. But it never got to the core of what they were going through. So they, it was those things. When it came to, family structure was a very important aspect. A majority of the boys in my study were in single parent households. A majority of them were trying to figure out what it meant to be a man.
Yeah.
A majority of them at some point had a problematic idea of what a man was. And they had good ones too. I don't want to frame it as everything was negative, but they definitely there were some, traditional masculine norms that they were trying to fulfill that were probably more damaging to their mental health than helpful. And then there was other parts where, I want to help my mom. I want to support my mom. That also came up. So that was an interesting part of it. That's a big part of it because Black boys, unlike other groups, don't have the same supports. They're already framed in our society as negative, right? They're framed as problematic, as these bad kids or whatever. They're adultified in our society, meaning that as a society, we tend to think black boys are older than they are, right? We tend to already make them adult. You can look into like situation with Tamir Rice, where 14-year-old boy who they said, oh, as a grown menacing man, right? We always start to adultify them at a very young age. So we remove a lot of their boyhood from them, and boyhood is important because that's when you get to enjoy life, right? You get to enjoy just being. I made mistakes, but I'm a child. And I need to learn, and we remove that opportunity from them to have that boyhood. And so they're already at this situation where the society is kind of beating them down and looking at them in this kind of tough way. And so when they don't have that strong familial kind of connection, then when it comes to things like depression and different mental health challenges, who do they go to? How do they identify where to go and seek support? So, so I start rambling, so I don't want to go too far. But that was the gist of my dissertation, my research that I'm publishing right now. And I'm also, moving into a different area around autism and depression as well. But that's a different section of my research that may not be as relevant to this conversation.
Mm-hmm. So I heard you say that they've adopted some traditional male ideologies. What are some of those things that you would challenge about manhood that maybe we need to rethink, or some things we need to keep the same?
Yeah. Well, it's we really need to, and research needs to do this, but also parents and household and practice need to do this. Is really challenge this idea of what independence is for men,
Mm-hmm.
because all teenagers want to be more independent. That's just a part of the developmental stage, right? As adolescents, they become more independent. I go to my friends, to my parents, I do this on my own. But for black boys specifically, for boys, but black boys more specifically, this idea of independence almost it hinders them from actually going out and asking for help when they need it.
Mm-hmm.
Because in their mind, as young men, I got to do this on my own. Self-reliance, right? It's I don't need anybody else, and if I can't do it on my own, then that means I'm weak. That I'm, somehow I'm lacking something. And that came out in my research a lot, was that, well, if I got to go to the social worker or I got to go to this person, then that must mean something's wrong with me, because I can't stop myself from crying, or I can't get over this feeling that I'm having. I had a young man who had just went through a breakup, and a pretty emotional breakup with a girl. He was 16, 17 years old. We all know it. At that age, every breakup seems like the worst
end of the world.
Right? And he thought he had to deal with it on his own. He didn't want to cry in front of anybody. He didn't want his dad to know he was feeling this way about this girl and that she broke his heart. He didn't know who to go to for support. And so he dealt with it on his own. And it became detrimental for him because he could not articulate his feelings. And who can? What 60-year-old can really articulate what they feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was in tremendous stress, not just because of the breakup, but also because he couldn't deal with those feelings. But he thought he had to, as a man, deal with this on his own. And so that's the first thing. This sense of independence really needs to be unpacked. We need to really help our boys understand that independence doesn't mean do it on your own. It means come for guidance and I'll help you. And there's things you can do on your own, absolutely, to try to get over some of these feelings or get beyond it or unpack these things. But we really need to encourage our boys to be open, not only with themselves but with others. Right? For fathers, I think one of the things is, and I struggle with this too with my son sometimes, is like, give your child, especially your boys, an emotional attachment.
Uh-huh.
We're sometimes so focused on trying to turn them into men and this tough guy, persona, that we don't give them the nurturing. And we expect their mothers or their aunts or their grandmothers or the women in their life to give them that sense of nurturing. But these boys, and in my study, one of the things that came out interesting was they were looking for nurturing from men.
Mm-hmm.
The black men in their life was like their okay, or the black men gave them the okay to react how they wanted to. Like I started crying because my dad told me I could. That
Mm-hmm.
black man in my life told me it was okay to cry. So now I'm crying. Now I'm letting it out. So the black men were almost the gatekeepers to their emotional outlet. All right. So there has to be a sense of nurturing that comes from the men in these boys' lives that give them the permission almost to really seek help to unload the emotional kind of burdens. So I think addressing the independence, providing a sense of nurturing from men.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely the things around physical aggression that I think is problematic, right? To deal with the emotions, you have to go do something physical. And I like working out. I boxed in a past life, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a great it's great. But I also realized that wasn't helping me deal with anything. It was helping me feel better at the moment.
Yeah.
But as soon as I'm done, that whatever's going on is still there.
Yeah.
And so that's one part of it, of young boys that they thought was men. Like, oh, I have to be physical. I have to get this out by working out and being physical. I'm gonna get in a fight, or something like that, right? So that needs to be addressed. But you mentioned some of the positive things. There's a such thing as positive masculinity that doesn't get nearly as much attention as we talk about toxic masculinity, all these things. Positive masculinity doesn't get nearly as much attention, in the media, with people talking. There are aspects of masculinity that are great, right? This sense of family that the boys talked about. They love their moms, they love their sisters, their younger siblings. They always want to be there and provide for them. That's a good thing, right?
It is.
Again, that encourages that connection to family, right? So there's that part that the boys we talked about. Like, I go to my mom for emotional support. That means you recognize that your family is an emotional connection to you. Yeah. Right? That's a part of masculinity that gets ignored. So,
yeah. Oh man, that's good. For single mothers, in raising a child, a young man. So this is how I want to frame the question. I'll give an example of some people that I knew. And she was dealing with a young boy, our young son, and he was rambunctious. He was full of energy, he ate good, but he was all over. He was running all over the place. He's about 7 years old, and he was just gone. He was nice. He was polite. He wasn't disrespectful, but he was just full of energy. And she said, I think he has ADD. Now I'm no doctor. Mm-hmm. I am a parent of raised three kids, and were my sons that way? Yeah, but I had to discipline, not physical discipline, but I was always a consequence reward. You do this, this is what's going to happen, and when it happened, I wasn't playing. Listen, this is the consequence. There wasn't no 3 strikes. That's it. One time I tell you, that's it. And so he calmed that down. However, I would go home when I came home and picked him up from school, and they had an outlet. We go into the park. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he always had that energy, but I disciplined them in a way, or I say corrected them or directed them in a way where it's not time for that right now. We're going to have time for that. I'm going to give you time for that energy to go and just rambunctious and jump and swing and holler and scream. You're going to have that time, but it's not that time. And so when I looked at her, I was like, ain't nothing wrong with that boy. He needs a little bit different. He needs to know when to sit down and when to go and be berserk, get that out of the system. But you can't, I wanted to say, and this is just my vernacular and help me, you can't baby that boy into that. You have to give him some hardcore discipline, and this is what we're doing, and not move from that. He ain't got no ADHD. He just rambunctious. He needs to know when and when he cannot do that. And that's just me, and I can't diagnose, but help me with that scenario where you're looking at with somebody who say, oh, well, he's all over the place, where it may be something wrong with him, or maybe he just needs some discipline.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, ADD and ADHD are really hard to grapple with because there's an overdiagnosis of it.
Yes, especially
with Black people.
And when there's extra money attached to the school for it. Yeah, so you already know. Yep.
Like that, right? So there becomes almost an incentive to like, oh, that's ADHD. But there's so much to unpack on that. First off, schools are not structured well enough to help kids deal with energy, right? You go to school and you're told to sit down. You're told to stay still, raise your hand, walk in a straight line. Kids aren't designed for that. Right? Kids have energy. They want to move. So the school's already saying, well, your kid's acting out. They're not staying still. Well, maybe, like you said, my kid needs to be in the park. My kid needs structure, but they need space where they can have that outlet.
Yeah, lecture-based learning ain't for everybody. Just to be sitting there in the lecture, but go ahead.
Especially with boys, because on one hand, boys are socialized to be more physical and run around and play sports. And then they get in school and they're told, no, sit still. You have one time to play sports. That's in gym class. That's that half hour you got in gym class, or that 30 minutes you got at the recess. But everything else is about sitting still and not moving, right? So schools that's already one thing. Like, when people say, well, I think it's ADHD, and I want to be careful because there are kids who legit have these cases where they need support, they need, possibly medication or things like that. But there's a significant overdiagnosis of it. And when the case in the scenario that you described for this young man, young boy. I try not to call your boys men because I don't like the idea of turning them into men too early. But
Yeah.
for this boy, there may be that need of like, hey, your kid is a little rambunctious, but maybe he's missing something that would give him the structure he needs. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna be careful what I say because just in this cancel culture time, people will cancel me real fast. But you know, I find that there's a role that men play in their kids' lives,
Uh-huh.
right?
Oh, I'll say it. I'll say it, and you ain't got to just wink at me if I'm hitting on. When I speak to my kids, there's the vibrato of my voice is different with them than with their mom. And their mom told me, they's like, I tell them something, you tell them something. The response is different, and that may be in the structure of the brain or how the man responds or speaks, but that voice. My stepdad, he spoke. I was like, okay.
Yeah,
It
absolutely. I
wasn't
mean,
no.
we see it play out in every role. We see when there's especially, and it's something unique about. I'll say something unique about black men
Mm,
because especially with black boys, when you walk into my wife works in high school right now. How the boys in the school respond to black men saying one thing, I don't gotta repeat myself. The actions are different
uh-huh.
than my wife saying something to them or their white female teacher saying something to them.
Yeah.
Right? There's something about that with my kids. My son, I say it once. I don't like repeating myself. And similar to what you said, I don't need to physically punish you, but you already know that I'm not gonna sit here and ask you 6 times. I'm not
Right.
gonna count down.
Right.
That's it, right?
Right.
My wife, on the other hand, is a little more negotiable with him. She's like, she does everything with it. Everything for her is a question.
I like
Could
the
you
way you
please do
put
this?
that. I don't care about no questions. I told you something
Yeah,
to do.
yeah,
I
exactly.
like the way you put
You
that.
don't have an option here. When I
Right.
say do it, it gets done. I'm not saying could you please. I'm saying hey, go do the dishes.
Right.
I'm not saying could you do the dishes, right? So there's a difference in that, and there's a difference in tone, and that shows. And research supports it, but again, people tend to take that assumption as like, well, you're saying a woman can't raise a kid. I'm not saying a woman can't. I'm saying that there's aspects of raising a kid that a man tends to, a man's tone, his temperament, his behavior tends to
Yeah.
lend itself to. In the case of the young man, the young boy you're talking about, there's a possibility that it's a single mother, maybe a father figure or a man in his life that says, "Hey, sit down.
Yeah.
We'll get that right." Maybe there's also an aspect. This is what one thing about being a single parent. You don't have a lot of flexibility in time with your kids because you're working, you're shopping groceries, you're cooking dinner, you're getting kids ready for school. How often do you take that kid to the park? How
Yeah.
often do you get that kid outside? How often is that kid in activities, sports, activities, and not even just physical activities, but things that are mentally stimulating? Is this kid in structured programs that give them a sense of comfort that allow them to kind of deal with a lot of those emotions, right? Or a lot of that energy. Um, and it's hard for single parents. So I don't want to make it sound like single parents doing wrong. I'm
Yeah.
saying I was raised by a single parent. It's hard when you got like my mom had 3 kids. It was just us, and this is in the '90s. So she's like, we don't play outside. We're outside. You're good.
Yeah. Right.
Like my son is a little more like I told you go outside and leave the iPad in here when you go outside.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But this jump to ADHD tends to be often, or ADD sometimes comes from a lack of something the kid needs, and ADD is kind of like that's my scapegoat. Like, oh, it's this thing that he has. It's not that he's lacking a structure that would help him, right? So I always say, again, there's legitimate cases of ADD for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But before we jump to diagnosing, before we jump to medication, I always say let's try some different things with these kids.
Okay.
Let's try some different
Yeah.
structures. Let's try some different programs. Maybe in schools. We found a lot that sometimes the kids need to be bumped up a grade. Sometimes the work that they're doing in classroom just isn't challenging enough.
Uh-huh.
And they need more challenging to get their mind working. Maybe they need more. My son is definitely a hands-on learner. But, the pandemic hurt him a lot because
Yeah.
learning over iPad didn't help him.
Yeah.
He needs someone to sit there with him and kind of go through things.
Uh-huh.
And so when he was home, he was zoning out and staring.
Yeah.
I walk upstairs like, what
My
are you staring at the
son
wall
too.
for?
Yeah. My son too. He checking out.
So,
Lunchtime, he checked out.
Yeah. And so, but there's, having 2 parents is nice because my wife's working. I could walk upstairs and check on him when he was doing, an online learning and like talk to him, and vice versa. There's always like my son, he had a half day today. He's here home early, but I can work from home and be here to support him instead of him sitting here by himself, which that's when kids get in trouble. They're by themselves, do something they shouldn't be doing, right? That's I think one of the important things about a structured, 2-parent home for a child as much as possible.
Yeah.
You know, I know there's always
Yeah.
circumstances beyond people's control, but as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned about going to school and how they respond to you. Did you see that? I don't know if it was a news clip or something where you had a school where they had violence every day, and the dad stood up. Man, I was in tears watching that. Yeah, yeah. Talk about that, man. That was beautiful, bro. That was beautiful. That was absolutely excellence from the men.
There's so much to unpack on it, right? There's so many things we can say. I mean, you have black fathers who showed up to the school was out of control, apparently, according to the news clip. And I don't know the school, so I don't know how much, it was out of control versus at this point there's a lot of fights happening and things going on. And these brothers showed up to the school, right? And and essentially provided support in the school. So one thing that I noticed when I was watching it, and I only watched a short clip of it, but from what I've seen, they weren't just there to be disciplinarians. They weren't just there to say, "Hey, get your butt in class," or "I'm in trouble." They were there to provide support for kids.
Yeah,
that's the part that often gets missed with men in kids' life. Is we look at men as the disciplinarian. You check them, and we do that. But again, I was saying earlier, there's a nurturing aspect to being a father as well, right? I'm here to support you. Oh, you're having a bad day? Let's talk. Tell me what's going on. Come with me. Let's separate from all this nonsense. Talk to me about what's going on, right? And I noticed that with them. So it wasn't just, I'm coming in to scare all the kids and acting right. They were high-fiving the kids in the hallway, talking to them about what was going on. So that, to me was a beautiful moment, right? It really emphasized the importance of the man in children's lives. And again, not saying that women can't raise children on their own, not saying that there's a deficit women have. There's just something also about a man, right?
Yeah.
But a man can't raise a child on his own 100% too. There's other aspects that need to be added.
Oh, yeah. So, this show is pro man, bro. We family nucleus, and I believe in building with the man, building with the woman as much as possible. Obviously, certain situations don't work out. I've been in situations don't work out, but I believe in you get with a woman and you try to build with her. That's where I'm at with it. Men, I think you need your man. I tell my daughter all the time. I said you need me and your mom.
Yeah,
because the women part, I can't do nothing for you.
There's things that we all bring in, as much as we want to. I think there's a lot of stigma right now around saying that men are needed in children's life. It's unfortunate because I think the research, as I'm someone who does research, the research supports that there's aspects that men bring into a child's life. Again, I was raised by a single parent, and I have a PhD now. I'm doing good, but I still have my father figure in my life. I still have my dad around. My dad made some things from him weren't so great. Other parts of him were incredible, right? And we went. Him and I have had conversations about things like that. So there's something there, right? That needs to be studied. I would love to see more research on fatherhood, and there's a lot of research happening right now on fatherhood and it's like that. I would love to read more about it. But in my work, what I've found is that men, especially like I said, black men for black boys, bring in a sense of comfort and support to black boys that they report that they don't get from others.
Yeah.
Right. Especially when you allow it. So like I'll give you an example. One of the boys I talked to, he's one of the few kids I talked to whose dad was completely open. His dad, he was one of the few boys in my study that said, "Yeah, I go to my dad first." One of my questions was like, if you were going through rough things or having stress in your life and going through some tough times, who would you go to for support? Who would you go to first? Why would you go to that person first? And he said, my dad. I'll go to my dad first. So okay. And that was, like I said, he was one of the first kids that said that. So I'm like, oh, so what would make you go to your dad first? His dad was open with him. His dad was honest with him. He felt like he could cry to his dad. He could yell to his dad. He can, whatever he was feeling, he can unload on him. And his dad was there, no judgment. And that's the word he used. He didn't feel like his dad judged him, right? And that young man's response, seeing a young boy, I'm trying to change my language here. That young boy's response was similar to what we see in the video of the young men, the men at the school.
Yeah.
Where he felt like he felt like, oh yeah, I had a bad day at school, but I talked to my dad and I kind of straightened up. I got myself together. I went back to school and dealt with this issue in this positive way. So the dad was encouraging, and his dad encouraged him to talk to counselors. His dad encouraged him to go to a social worker when he was feeling sad in school. Hey, go talk to your therapist, your social worker in the school. Let me know what they say. So there's a sense of encouragement again and support. that video was, it was dope, and I would love to see more of what they're doing if they're putting those things in practice, like on a larger scale, where it's becoming a consistent thing.
Yeah, I'll say this: out in my school, the high school my son goes to, Southfield A&T. I believe the Kappa fraternity. They greet the first, at least the first day of school. They were out greeting the kids as they come in. When they went to a school, Cornerstone School in Detroit, and the fathers, had to help the kids get out the car and walk them into school. And there are some programs that have been doing that. They don't get a lot of light about. There's a dad's club in that regard, but like I said, in Southfield A&T, the brothers from the Kappa fraternity, they were out there just greeting and saying hello and welcoming the kids back to school. The men that were out there, man, and that's a beautiful thing. You know what I mean? So I do think it happens a little bit more. I think this situation, because of all the fighting, got a little bit more press than just the normal dads that kind of do stuff all the time and spend some time out. Listen, brother, Dr. Williams, I don't want to keep you too long. I do have another appointment, but I want to have you on again, man.
Sure.
I have another brother who is a friend of mine who's writing a book. It's called MIA, Men in Abuse.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, we want to, and he's bringing to light some of the emotional abuse that men go through, don't talk about. And if they do express it, it's in violence, suicide, depression, drinking, and just shedding some light on that. Yeah, man. And I want to have you and him on, so I'm going to try to coordinate that. And maybe you can help him with how the book is going and that kind of thing, man. But that's another subject. If you haven't noticed, I'm dealing with males, mental health. It needs to be talked about. We need more education. We need to know really emotionally that it's okay to go and talk to somebody. Do you have any last regards, man, before I close out?
First of all, I appreciate the platform to have these conversations. Like I said, I think there's a lot of concerns around people always kind of teeter-totter around conversation around men because they don't want to offend other groups. So I appreciate having the space to have that honest conversation. I appreciate your emphasis on men and Black men, and how we support our children, our boys. And I think this work is important. It's timely. It has to continue to happen. Black fathers have to overcome a lot of stigma. But if research shows that Black fathers are the most active in their children's lives.
I saw that too. And we need to change that narrative too. Just to talk about that. I saw that. Yeah.
So we need to make sure we emphasize that like the data shows that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And we're here, and that there's always room for improvement, but we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So these type of platforms to me allow us to have those conversations and overcome a lot of that stigma and those negative images of Black fathers. So I really appreciate you doing the work that you're doing, man. And yeah, for sure, I would love to come back and have a conversation around men and abuse, because that really taps into my research around Black boys and depression, because it starts at a young age and it transcends into older age and bad habits and bad behaviors, right? That land us into a lot of trouble. And a lot of those things are things that pull us out of our kids' lives, right? The trauma that we experience pulls us from our kids' lives, which leads to some of the even greater negative outcomes. So, for sure, man. My winter is going to be a lot more free than than the fall has been, for sure. I'm fresh off the job market this year, so I'm looking forward to it, for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, thank you. This has been another edition of the Golden Experience. I have Dr. Ed-Dee Williams on, talking about mental health, specifically how we need to, the knowledge we need to have on raising boys, particularly Black boys, the role of manhood, the role of men, the role of fathers in young boys' life, and how they grow up, and the importance of that. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.
Thank you.
So that's it, man. I appreciate you so much. What makes me feel so good, bro, is every time I say Dr. Williams. Man, you understand what I'm saying? I know you appreciate it too. You got through it.
It's still bizarre to hear, man. It's still bizarre. I just got I got 2 job offers recently, and all the emails like Dr. Williams. I'm like, this is crazy. So it's I really appreciate it, man. Yeah.